Hey there. So I wanted to share my thoughts around the World Eaters news. It is, after all, exciting stuff, but my more edited content takes too much time to produce in order to release anything in a timely manner. So while I go on and on sharing my thoughts, here's some gameplay B-roll. Finally, we got confirmation from GW that World Eaters are on the way. Though this is something we always knew was a matter of when and not if, based on the precedent set by what GW has done with the Thousand Sons and the Death Guard. Naturally, World Eaters fans are quite pleased by the news, and while I too am enthused by this confirmation, and the implications of finally seeing a glorious Demon Primarch Angron realized, I am a bit soured by the framing. Now, to be clear, I'm not one to be contrary to the popular opinion for the sake of it, but you're watching this video to get my opinions and thoughts, so let's carry on. The World Eaters getting fleshed out was confirmed by an interview with Stu Black. Now, I quite like Stu. His enthusiasm for what he speaks to always comes across as genuine in all the interviews with him which I have seen. But during this interview, he said something that rubbed me the wrong way.
One of the cool things about this project was an opportunity to treat the World Eaters as the faction in their own right, so we've taken them out of the Chaos Space Marines book, so that we can give them all the love that they deserve.
Which, on an initial viewing, is a really nice sentiment, right? But after thinking on it for a little bit, oh boy do I hate it. This statement highlights an issue I've had for some time, and has provided a near-perfect basis for me to elaborate on the issue at hand. The reason for the negative reaction to what would be considered by most to be good is twofold: factional favoritism. As longtime viewers of the channel will know, I have made many a video highlighting and berating the faction maltreatment on GW's part, and the framing of what Stu says here falls right in line. I mean, just look at what's being said. This was an opportunity to treat the World Eaters as a faction in their own right, so we have taken them out of the Chaos Space Marines book, so we can give them all the love that they deserve. And you might be thinking, well, come on now, what's so bad about that? Well, it implies that the other legions are lesser, which I am sure must feel real nice. And to reiterate, my intention is not to yuck the yum of World Eaters players in the future, or that of Thousand Sons or Death Guard players. But principally, I believe it is in poor taste to levy such favoritism at the sub-faction level. And although it's a messy bag with a lot going on, I'll explain why. We can all see the intent GW has in taking the 4 legions wholly devoted to a single Chaos God and making them their own factions, as those 4 are not like the rest. But I don't think that in itself is enough to justify rules favoritism on the tabletop, as all the Chaos Legions are varied and unique if looked upon at the same resolution, and so the focus feels arbitrary. It wasn't all that long ago when the Blood Angels, Dark Angels, and Space Wolves were treated as their own factions as well. And I should mention, I'm not against the creation of models, even if it is on the sub-faction level like with the Godbound Legions. More models and units are generally always welcome. What I am speaking to is rule support and rules disparity on the tabletop. Something I've found myself thinking more and more lately is this idea that our experience as players on the tabletop is the reward for what is, to be frank, the monumental efforts we go through for this hobby when compared to other more easily accessible and far less costly alternatives. And with that perspective in mind, the way GW manages the rules environment for the sweet payoff of putting models on the table is irritating to say the least. So returning to the news at hand. Do certain sub-factions like the World Eaters deserve more love than, say, the Iron Warriors, Night Lords, or Wordbearers? Or hell, even the Black Legion, the sub-faction which serves as the antagonistic face of the IP? I'd say no, they don't. I'm of the purview that you shouldn't get more layers of rules for playing a certain sub-faction over another one within that faction. And to this, some of you out there might be thinking, that position doesn't hold. The Death Guard Thousand Sons and soon-to-be World Eaters are no longer being treated as sub-factions. As Stu Black reiterated, they are being treated as factions in their own right. This brings me to my second issue. Chaos feels SMOL. Secondly, GW taking the God-marked legions and blowing them up to be factions in their own right highlights the second issue for me, which is, doing so makes the forces of chaos feel small. It doesn't feel like the galaxy-spanning threat the narrative positions them as. This is a conclusion I've arrived upon because everything is relative. And by looking at a visualized breakdown of the faction standings in Warhammer 40k, we can see how small chaos is in comparison to the Imperium. The choice for GW to treat the God-marked legions as separate factions doesn't change the reality that in the context of the universe, they are still a Space Marine Legion, one of the original 20 set forth during the Great Crusade. GW does try and make these God-marked legions seem as substantive as the other factions by giving them their own sub-faction benefits, like with the Death Guard's Plague Companies. and I'm sure that the World Eaters will get their own slaughter companies in kind. But that in itself demonstrates my point. It's a meaningless distinction, because every other legion and even chapter has companies with unique traits, heraldry, and combat preferences, which all could similarly get extrapolated into rules if the choice were made. This route keeps the forces of chaos from feeling as vast as the Imperium's forces. And as I've said in the past, villains and antagonists need to be imposing and threatening. It is in a sense a prerequisite for that role. But when from the player's point of view, the Imperium outnumbers chaos more than 2 to 1, that is a much harder sell. Now, while I don't care much for Age of Sigmar's game system, take a look at the faction breakdown and you'll notice it's much more of an even distribution. We can also see that GW is following Age of Sigmar's Chaos faction options, in having one faction for each Chaos God through the God-marked legions in 40k. However, for all the reasons I've stated thus far, it loses more than it gains. So GW, if you're listening, I'll clarify. Elevating certain sub-factions over others categorically devalues those which are left behind. This runs counter to the notion of the tabletop experience rewarding your customers' hobby efforts. And while treating the God-marked legions as their own factions does allow your catalog to increase the number of Chaos factions it can offer, in the context of the universe, it functionally remains the same. But this is the route that Games Workshop has committed to, and I have a feeling that when the time comes around for GW to develop the next Chaos faction, it's just going to be the Emperor's Children. And bully for those players, but man, what are we doing? All the same criticisms valid here are still going to be valid then too. Which, during that time span, hopefully the Imperium doesn't get another faction as well. With that said, there are two obvious choices that come to mind when I think of which factions to add to Chaos to make them feel more comparably vast. The first is a proper realization of the Lost and the Damned, divorced from Codex Chaos Space Marines. In the same way a lone Genestealer will evolve into a Patriarch to build a congregate of Genestealer cultists, so too can an aspiring champion go rogue and seek to build their own army of mortal followers in pursuit of power. The template is quite transparent, and to be frank, feels like low-hanging fruit. And the second is the Dark Mechanicum. And for clarity, I'm not talking about a mirrored, spiky version of the Loyalists' AdMech. The Dark Mechanicum ought to be what they believe is the true Mechanicum. Free from the shackles of the Imperium's dogma, able to truly innovate in whichever direction they choose. Oh, and a bonus pick, Space Skaven, because they would be rad. Well, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching, and a special thanks to my patrons, Julius Maximus, as well as the others who help keep the dream alive. So, if you enjoyed this video, there is a like button. And if you want to help my channel grow, there is a subscribe button. There's also a bell button and a share button, so press the buttons you want to press. And with that, I hope to see you guys in the next one.